Should the Dallas Cowboys trade for All-Pro receiver DeAndre Hopkins? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. He is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, we've got a lot of Cowboy things happening right now, so let's jump right into it. So there's some DeAndre Hopkins rumblings out there. It seems like the Cardinals are going to trade him this offseason. Do you think the Cowboys are interested, and should they be interested?
Yeah, that's a big question. Honestly, we had to get into this show because we got into such a lengthy kind of back and forth conversation pre-show about this, and we knew that this was going to be a topic of conversation. I think it's complicated, right? I think on a 10,000 foot view, if you're just asking me yes or no, do I want DeAndre Hopkins on this team? I'm saying yes. I want DeAndre Hopkins added. Here, drilling down a little bit on my concerns. Okay, let's start from there. Yes, I will. I would like to trade for DeAndre Hopkins. Yes, I think the asking price that's being put out there in the media as a second round pick with a conditional other pick happening, that seems pretty reasonable to me.
Sure.
I mean, we could comment on that separately if you want, but that seems reasonable enough to me.
Yep.
I think having a guy that can get open, who has produced consistently still through all these years, I think that has value. I think he kind of fits the mold of the kind of receiver who can get open in the West Coast system. All that makes sense to me. The main concern I have, and I feel like you share this main concern, is that we generally feel like the Cowboys offense needs to find a way to get faster. And this is traveling in the opposite direction. DeAndre Hopkins, despite his ability to get open, despite his ability to make incredible catches, contested catches, and to produce at a high level, score touchdowns, get yards, he is not, he's slower than CeeDee Lamb. He's slower than all the rest of the guys that you have on this team. He would be the slowest consistent receiver that you would have on this team. So you're taking a team that you already have concerns about team speed in their offense of the Cowboys, and you're adding another piece that is a great piece, and he will definitely be a huge part of the offense if he comes in and he can take this offense to another level for sure. But the concern is that it continues to actually slow the offense down even more, with the only real recourse to kind of course correct on this at that point would be tight end. Maybe another running back that you could pair with Tony Pollard instead of Zeke that has more speed there as well. You could probably go out and get another wide receiver, but depending on what happens with Gallup, now you're talking about a fourth wide receiver, and that's on top of the guy that you have that already in waiting for spots. So those are my main concerns. Is not so much is he a good player? Can he still produce? Will he help the Cowboys? I think the answer to all of those is yes. My concern is that what is the kind of cumulative effect to adding, another player that doesn't, increase the team speed on this for the Cowboys.
I think for the most part, I'm in, right? Like you mentioned the price. Would be what was the Dallas pick? 57, 58 a second round, like
58, I think. Yeah,
whatever. That's really not anything noteworthy.
Considering real quick. The other thing too is considering all the. I mean, you've probably experienced this too. Considering that in all the mock drafts, no matter what simulator I use, every time I get to 58, that's the hardest pick I have. Like that's because it's just like if you feel like you're washed, you feel like you either want to trade down or trade up a little bit. It just seems to be. And look, the draft doesn't always end up that way, but to me, that really kind of plus the fact that the Cowboys have a history of not really hitting on these second round picks Give away the second
Sure.
round pick if you need to, man. Like just get something in return that isn't a bust. That I would be happy with.
And the overall contract is pretty reasonable for the team that gets him. It's basically 2 years, $35 million. So what is that? I'm not great at math. $17.5 million a season, which is probably below market value. And Hopkins has already gone on record saying that he'll work with the team on the contract, whether he you need to add another year to kind of spread out some of the cap hits. So that part of it's really nice. I do have some concerns about speed, as you mentioned. And then on top of that, can you afford to pay DeAndre Hopkins $17 million, Michael Gallup $13.5 million, and oh, by the way, CeeDee Lamb's contract is coming up, right? That's a lot of money invested into 3 receivers. I think you could figure it out, and the honest answer is one of those 3 guys probably just isn't on the roster next year, right?
Or CeeDee Lamb has to get his new contract sooner than later, right? Because they would have to like move the money around in a way that they'll backload it, right? So that it can all fit. Yeah.
The other thing that does concern me a little bit is he turns 31 in June, which isn't super old. But when you compare it to a lot of the other receivers kind of his era, I mean, Landon, they all fell off at like age 30 or 31. Between AJ Green was done, completely done at 31. Julio was done at 31. Dez was done at 29. Demaryius Thomas was done at 30. Allen Robinson basically done at 28. So while I think his game was going to age better than a lot of those receivers because he doesn't rely on athleticism, it is a tad concerning when you start getting these receivers that are into their 30s.
I definitely agree. Like, I think that is a thing. I also think that he has aged better than those guys because I mean, if you look at the way at just last year, how he played, I didn't see a ton of drop off. Now there's production drop off because he had to deal with a litany of terrible backup quarterbacks in a system.
Suspension.
Yeah. And a suspension, and in a system that frankly, by the time he got back into it, is notorious for falling off the cliff in the last half of the season. I think that, like physically, and here's the other thing too, that's kind of the counterbalance my earlier point. His game is not built on speed. His game is not built on explosion. Certainly not the way Des Bryant's game is built. Certainly not the way that, even Julio Jones was certainly built. The reason that a guy like Julio Jones and some of these other guys were able to kind of continue to keep playing in the league is that they have a skill set, a wide receiver skill set that exists outside of their athleticism. Like they can get open without the elite athleticism because they have experience at that point. I think that Hopkins has an element of that where he understands nuance of the position. His game will age well. And I think as long as that knee checks out, and he's like, I think a year and some months, I'm almost a year and a half away from that MCL injury. I think that he should be able to. I think look, this is a guy, he's probably going to miss a game or two. Like just, that's just because of how physical he tends to play, or a flare up or something. But I don't necessarily worry about his game falling off a cliff quite yet. It feels like he's still playing good football, and we haven't quite seen the decline yet. I think a lot of what we've seen in his number, kind of going back and forth, have to do with the circumstance of, obviously his suspension. And frankly, Arizona, despite having Kyler Murray and all the hot shot aspects that we all expected out of the Arizona offense, let's say in early 2021, we've seen that Cliff Kingsbury's offense fell off a cliff. I mean, like that's something that's been happening with him since college. But on top of that, it just kind of it all just fizzled out. The offense never went the way it did. Murray never kind of took that next step, seemingly. And it just never really kind of worked out with Hopkins in the way it should have.
We just got done talking about all the reasons why it's a little concerning, but let's talk about why this does make sense for the Cowboys and how Hopkins can help this offense next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on anything and everything from money lines to point scores to 3-pointers drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, later, we're talking about DeAndre Hopkins. Let's say the Cowboys do this move and it costs them 58, one of their 5th-round picks, and ultimately Hopkins agrees with 1-year extension to kind of smooth the money out. What would make you excited about this move?
Well, I mean, it's just a reliable, consistent, dangerous player who you're going to be putting in maybe the best, most advantageous position he's had in his career, right? Where he's not being forced to be the focus point of the offense. He's actually, the secondary weapon. Most of the attention will be on CeeDee Lamb. And this is a guy that probably hasn't seen a bunch of single coverage in the last few years. So I think the opportunity to kind of play against the not only just single coverage, but also potentially, cornerback twos on some of these teams, that's going to really, really help kind of, stop that curve that you see for the age where the drop off happens, right? Is like his job is suddenly going to become a lot easier than it has been ever before. So I think just in a sense that there are times when this offense struggled to consistently create first downs or just have reliable. There's been times when they had unreliable pass catchers on the outside, right? They couldn't just rely on a guy to win one-on-one coverage, make a difficult catch, and convert the first down. That's what this guy is going to do all day. Like he could be your third down specialist. You want to put all the attention on whoever a tight end is on CeeDee Lamb and leave Hopkins in single coverage. Great. That we'll take Hopkins on a slant route versus almost any corner in the league, or and I think that's really the thing about his game is that he's a contested catcher. He can go up in the air and get the ball. We've all seen the kind of Des Bryant-esque kind of leaping catches, but he's also a very reliable hands catcher, and I think that's something that despite all the stuff that all the skills that the different wide receivers had in the Cowboys last year, they didn't have a guy who was a reliable hands catcher, like huge catch radius guy that Dak can look to, get the ball to. And in tight situations and feel confident that he will come down with the football the way that you wanted Gallup to kind of come back to, the way that you can rely on CeeDee Lamb. But the problem is that he was the only person. So I think this provides another very stable wide receiver who can catch the ball, who can convert, and who can also play above the rim if you need to. If you get down in the red zone, he can become a red zone threat as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously having him in one-on-one situations is going to be awesome, right? And if you happen to lose Dalton Schultz in free agency, which I think you're going to do, I think he could actually help you in some of the same ways, right? If you want to line him up in the slot and give him free releases and kind of transition him into a Larry Fitzgerald role as he gets older, I think he could do that really, really well. The other thing about Hopkins that does make me excited is I think this would be the most accurate quarterback that he's ever played with.
Yeah.
I'm going to read you a list of the quarterbacks that have thrown a touchdown to DeAndre Hopkins in his career. You ready?
Yeah, let's hear it.
TJ Yates, Brandon Weeden, Deshaun Watson, Matt Schaub, Tom Savage, Brock Osweiler, Kyler Murray, Ryan Mallett, Case Keenum, Brian Hoyer, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Trace McSorley, and a couple others. But that's the list. And if you put him with a quarterback like Dak that throws in rhythm, that throws with timing and accuracy and anticipation, maybe you see that kind of prolong his career a little bit. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's the combination of both those things we just mentioned, right? The the downgrade in coverage that he's going to see on a week-to-week basis, the less difficult assignments that he's going to have on a week-to-week basis, and then on top of that, he's got a better quarterback throwing the football to him. I mean, I think Deshaun Watson, I think, is comparable, obviously, back in his prime before all that hullabaloo happened, and
look at the numbers he put up with Deshaun Watson, right?
All pro numbers, like top of the best wide receiver in football at that time, so. Yeah, and then I think it's pretty easy to go through his numbers and see the lines of demarcation as to when Kyler Murray wasn't in the lineup or Deshaun Watson was in the lineup, and you see exactly the shallow parts of his game, or of his statistical output at least. I think that those are all good points. I just think it's a situation where we all kind of are comparing it to what he's done previously and like, oh, what can he do for us here? But you have to like try to imagine what it's going to be like when inserted into our offense, right? And how he will operate. And I think that alleviation of all the stress of not being the guy. I mean, the guy to the point that last year, like you pointed out, he played in 9 games and had 90 targets. Like he was averaging 10 targets. Yeah. So he was averaging more than 10 targets a game. Like, and not that I don't think he wants that, but I think that the pressure of being the kind of only engine of the offense is something that he's not going to have to worry about when he's playing with Dallas.
And I'm looking at the numbers right now because I remember watching the game. They played Tampa on a Thursday night game, or Sunday night game, and he was open all game long against Jamel Dean, who's going to get absolutely paid in free agency. He got 1 pass for 4 yards on 11 targets in that game because the quarterback play was so bad. So you put him with a quarterback that knows where to put him, put the ball, can get to him in the ball when he's moving rather than having to make a ridiculous catch every single time he's targeted. And I think you could get a pretty good player. Now, the one thing I will say, I did push back a little bit on Twitter that when people were saying he's still a top 5 receiver, I just don't think he is anymore because there is a little bit of a lack of quickness. But I think he could still be like a super high-end number 2 receiver on the right team, and that's what we're looking for here, guys.
Yeah, I think, look, there's several ways to get those kind of high-end number 2s, right? You draft a guy when you already got a guy, which obviously that makes sense. You develop both of these guys and one of them is slightly better than the other. Or you get a guy who has formerly been a number 1 and is looking for a change of scenery, looking to move into the latter part of his career and is ready to thrive on a little bit easier situation and not have to be the kind of, like I said, guy to carry the water for an offense. So I think, DeAndre Hopkins seems like a pretty smart dude. And I think there's a reason that he's willing to be a little bit flexible with some of the money and he's willing to move on. I think he's just ready to kind of get away from the nonsense. He's been in Houston and then the last 3 years in Arizona. And I mean, there's just been a lot of terrible crap that's gone into both of those places the last few years, babe. And look, we can say what you want about the Cowboys and the Cowboys is absolutely a circus, but I would say that, for a player's point of view, this may be a much more stable situation than he's ever been in. And on top of that, it's a class of organization that is, the Texans, Cardinals, they do a good job, but he's never played for like a crown jewel organization, despite being an all-pro, and probably on the all-decade team.
I mean, just think of the last 5 years for him. He's dealt with the Bill O'Brien disaster, the Jack Easterby thing, which was ridiculous. He goes to Arizona and their GM gets in trouble for some off the field stuff and his head coach gets fired. And there's just a lot of crap. I mean, then he has to deal with the Deshaun Watson thing, like just a lot of crap going on. And obviously Dallas has their own stuff, but he's going to an organization that's, I can't believe I'm saying this, pretty stable for the most part. Like,
say what you want about the Cowboys. I mean, they're stable almost to a fault at this point, right?
Yeah, yes. So I think there's some appeal there. We've got some other Cowboy news that we want to talk about, specifically Tyron Smith, when we get back. All right, Landon, we just got done talking about DeAndre Hopkins and whether or not the Cowboys will pull the trigger on that move. We'll see. We should hear within the next week or so. We also got a little bit more information about the Cowboys and their cap space in the last day. according to Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, the Cowboys are working on, I should say this, reworking the deal of Tyron Smith. They're not a restructure. I saw some people saying the Cowboys are trying to restructure. It was a reworking of the deal.
It's not a setback, and it's nothing to be worried about.
Well, I just saw that. It's like, and I saw everybody automatically saying, "Oh, why are they restructuring its deal?" I wonder if that's not the case here.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, I think what was announced was very just nondescript. It was just like kind of they are working on a deal. They want to bring Tyron Smith back. Tyron Smith wants to come back. They mentioned the number. I think it was 13.5 or something like that. So I think it's basically just kind of more of an announcement that these two sides are trying to work towards an agreement to bring him back and potentially reduce his number so that they can have more cap flexibility.
Let's say that happens. Let's say they ultimately sign him to a 1-year extension just to kind of flatten up the money. What happens on the offensive line then?
It's a great question. I mean, I tend to think that it probably means that you're sliding Tyler Smith back into guard, that he becomes your left tackle backup. You obviously have Terrence Steele coming back at the right side. And then you need to figure something out at your backup interior guy. You need to figure something out as in your backup right tackle situation. And I think you've got candidates for each of those. And then also obviously the draft, if you want to go that route.
Jason Peters maybe coming back as the swing tackle again.
I mean, I think if he wants to, if he's interested and the price is right, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
I mean, he took vet minimum last year for Dallas. I can't believe that the price had gone up in a year.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, if he's willing to come back, I think that I would probably have him back just to have another voice in the room, and we'll see if he makes it all the way through training camp and all that. And like if someone comes in and takes his spot, that's great. But I think it wouldn't be bad.
Or he just doesn't sign until after training camp, like last year, basically.
Well, there could be that as well. I mean, I really wish he would come into the training camp because it would be nice to have him out there, and even if he just like didn't ever practice, it'd just be nice to have him around those guys, right?
Yes, but at the same time, like I don't think he wants to have his August booked up, right?
Yeah. I'm 42 and I barely want to go out to training camp, so
and you're just watching.
Yeah, and I'm just watching. So
I just wonder if that's like a wink deal with Jason Peters, like, hey, stay in shape, and when September 1st comes around and we're back,
in late August, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, come on back, but
yeah.
You probably don't need to do it right now, right? And frankly, it might depend on what happens with Let's Go and Ball in the offseason, right? If let's say Let's Go just takes monster steps and it looks like he could be a real player, do you need Jason Peters around potentially taking a spot on the active roster?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, right? Let's say Let's Go really plays, really gets into the weight room this year. Develops a little bit. It understands what his assignment is a little bit. It gets to the point where maybe you're not quite ready for him to be, the swing right tackle, but he's close enough that you feel like he's going to get there, in the season. Maybe you don't need Jason Peters, or maybe you wait on making the call, right? Until you get an opportunity to actually throw Let's Go out there and let him sink or swim. Just have Jason Peters there on your Rolodex would be helpful.
Just to go back to Tyron Smith really quickly, I'm all in giving him another year. Right? If he wants to come back and play, even at that, was it 13 million? Who cares? There's going to be a lot worse offensive linemen that get paid in free agency more than 13 million that don't have the pedigree that Tyron Smith does. Sign me up. And I know there's a good chance he misses a lot of the season because it's what's happened the last few years. But if he plays anything like he did in the playoff games, it's totally worth it. Totally worth it.
Well, yeah, I think now that you've got Tyler Smith, it makes a lot of sense. That's again why, I would say you need to have a really solid backup guard situation because, okay, now you've got a plan for Tyron Smith goes down. You just swing Tyler back out there. You put in another guard. You could say Jason Peters if you want to go that route.
Probably not.
But I think to me, honestly, like, you could make an argument that Tyler Smith might be the best tackle on this team. Or, I think he's in the conversation to the point where, the reason you're putting him in a guard is simply because you have 3 starting tackles and you can't play them all, right? So I think that if you could figure out a situation where you have a backup guard that you like enough that if Tyler needs to swing outside, that you plug him into the guard spot. I think that's a good plan for having. That's your Tyron Smith insurance, right? Like, okay, we know that we may not. We know that he will not play all 16 games this year. You know, 17 games. But that doesn't mean that we don't want him for as many as we can get, and that we don't have a plan in place for when eventually he has to sit out for a couple of games.
There's a guard that's working with Duke Manyweather, and working with Terrence Steele and Tyler Smith right now in Dallas. Maybe I'll save it for. I won't even tell you who it is. I'll save it for tomorrow's show when we do some free agents rankings on a guy that the Cowboys could potentially target next week on the open market. Yeah,
love a tease.
That is it. That's it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Now make your second listen the Locked On NFL Draft Show. Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez provide in-depth coverage of the biggest NFL draft prospects with deep dives into the sleepers and hidden gems that can change your favorite NFL franchise. Find Locked On NFL Draft wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go follow us on YouTube. Check it out over there, Locked On Cowboys. Go follow Landon at McCool BCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. We'll see you guys right back here tomorrow.